Good morning, everyone. It's really an inestimable pleasure and honor to have been asked to introduce an artist who can only evoke admiration for the beauty and power of the work. That, at least that's how I feel about her. And I'm not a visual artist per se, but I have a deep love for the visual arts. And because her art also crosses, I think, the boundaries, she dissolves a lot of boundaries in the arts, which is something that I'm very close to also. So she definitely, the sort of work she does crosses over into performance, or could even be seen from the sole vantage point of performance at some points. Pushpamala N is based in Bangalore, and she is one of a group of some of India's most sort of important artists of the past 3 or 4 decades who went through the Baroda Fine Arts program. And as far as I know, she worked with more, say, traditional substances in her art until the early 1990s, substances found on the Indian subcontinent. And her, I think, general, if not political conscience was badly shaken up in the early 90s by events in the country. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Pushpamala. The Babri Masjid and the subsequent riots that happened in Bombay. And she felt that her medium somehow was not enough to continue the way she was continuing. So she started venturing into the realm of photography. You could call her work photographic, you could call it performance art, you could call it video art. I think recently she's also come back to sculpture, actually, which is where one of the starting points in her career. And if you've seen her work, some of the work that I've been exposed to, she takes monoliths, cultural and governmental monoliths, sometimes commercially successful monoliths from, say, the paintings and the subsequent reproductions of the paintings of Raja Ravi Verma. She takes those as a starting point. She interjects herself into them. And through them, along with the lyrical beauty of the images she's both commenting upon and creating new lyrical beauty, she also makes a lot of deep, evokes a lot of deep thoughts about the way we look at things, about representation, through a sort of ritual of reproducing representation, is what I would say maybe is how I see her art. And it's not only things that are considered classically beautiful. Another very powerful series, which I've been particularly moved by, is a series called Native Women of South India, where she actually takes some of the horrific archives of the British photographers of the late 19th century, where they archived indigenous peoples, they archived criminals, they classified people, they sort of focused upon them in a very cruel and crude light in sort of documenting them. And she's taken those images, interjected herself into them to make very powerful statements, maybe anti-colonial, we could say. And otherwise, also, she's also very playful in other works, though at the same time, never losing her center as a strong woman in her works. If you've seen the works where she plays with images of film, and I don't know her name, was it Nadia, the woman, the bandit woman? Yes, yes, so that's one of my favorite works. So all of this work is there, but she's going to talk about some of her more recent work. And so without taking up too much time, I'm going to turn the platform over to Pushpamala. Thank you for doing this presentation, and thank you, Amit, for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the really nice introduction. So when Amit wrote to me about this boom and bust and all that, so I wondered, we had a little conversation, and I wondered how I could, apply this to my work, the whole idea of this bust tradition. In fact, one of the ways I refer to my work is the pseudo-archive, but Geeta Kapoor really scolded me, and she said, don't use the word pseudo, because the opposite camp is always calling us pseudo-secular and a pseudo-intellectual and all that, and it's a derogatory word. So I think the bust archive is a very nice term. And as I said, I was wondering how to apply it to my work, and I think it's quite interesting because from the very beginning, I think I've been creating these large archives of images and of works, even from the earliest days, because I never stop at one image. There are always a set of images, you know. Sometimes the set goes on to several hundreds. And then I also use the archives, different kinds of archives in different ways. I have a lot of references. I refer to a lot of different materials in my work. Some of them are classical and from different art, like of course art history, which I've studied for a long time, which I'm very, very interested in, or literature, film, theater, and so on. But a lot of these references are also from the popular, from daily life, what could be called cultural memory. And I am very interested in the vernacular and with slang. And yesterday we were having a conversation about provincial, you know, and Amit was saying that, you know, he thinks of provincial as a very, positive term, though it usually seen as something constraining. But I would use the word local. So a lot of my works are also site-specific. Actually, I'm not really I'm showing you two projects now, which are recent projects, because it's, as I said, I work in the large sort of projects which go on for several years, so I can't show you bits and pieces of each work, because I'd have to contextualize them and it would take too long. One of the people I'm I admire a lot, and which has influenced, and a book that has influenced me is the Arcades Project by Walter Benjamin. So it's amazing, because actually that's the way I work. A lot of my work can be seen as bundles of quotations. I'm quoting from various sources. Again, they're all very hybrid and mixed, because it goes from high to low. And so in that way, yeah, it's also I'm looking at the bust, material, daily life, slang, vernacular, and so on. Like my language is like a kind of slang language, many ways. I use a lot of humor in my work. And yeah, so Arcades Project, again, like, as you must know, like it's entirely made up of quotations. And and it's talking about Paris in the 19th century. And it's talking about it not in some intellectual terms, but actually in terms of very daily things, the arcades, which are the earliest forms of the malls probably, and the street, the fashion, and the underground sort of chambers below Paris, which were the chalk mines, and so on. But they're all quotations from different people. And I'm also very interested in Borges. In fact, some years ago, when I was the curator, I was asked to be the curator of the Chennai Photo Biennale. I called the Biennale the fauna of mirrors. So I saw photography as a fauna of mirrors. And of course, and I had several shows underneath, within that major show, Biennale, which, and in different sites, and each show had the title, many of them were taken from Borges as well, like Labyrinths, for instance, and so on. So what I'm going to just show a lot of images. I don't think those images are of very good quality on this, or they're rather small, but anyway, it'll give you some idea of the work. And so I'm going to show you two projects of mine. One is the Mother India project, which is sort of ongoing. I started in 2005 or something, and then, I have a background. I studied sculpture. So everyone now sees me as a kind of photo and video and performance artist, but I've also been doing sculpture since the last several years, and I'm showing this other project called, a series of works called Documenta Indica. But I'm very interested in the idea of the nation state, and a lot of my works actually interrogate this idea of the nation and also the place of woman in the nation. I've also worked in other countries, like for example, I have two major works in Paris. I can't show you everything, because if I show you bits and pieces, it just gets very kind of diffuse. So I'll just start now with so one thing I've been doing is, in the Mother India project, is recreating historical images of Mother India. So India is always a bit over the top, and while other countries have like one image of the national kind of a national symbol, we've had many images, starting with the 19th century, from the beginning of the nationalist movement. So I've recreated, one of the things that I do as a kind of, it's like a quotation, a form of quotation, is recreating existing images as closely as possible and performing in them. So by doing so, I'm putting myself as the artist, as the subject, and also at the center of this of political inquiry. So then I become culpable, and I'm also part of this thing which in a way I'm interrogating, critiquing, being ironical, sardonic about, and so on. So again, this is like an archive of these images. So this is the earliest, the very large works actually. The one on the left is the recreation, and the one on the right is the original image, which is a kind of image from the kind of a print, an early print from the 19th century. And it's very interesting. I found it in Christopher Pinney's book. I think it's called Images of India or something. And this is supposed to be the earliest image of Mother India found. And Mother India is actually handing over the child to Britannia. So the figure on the left is Britannia, and the figure on this old crone is Mother India. So in the earliest sort of depictions, India was seen as this kind of dissolute and sort of a decrepit sort of figure which had to be renewed. And in fact, this Young India was, Gandhi's paper was also called Young India. So there had to be this kind of rebirth of India, and that was, so it's interesting that, so I'm playing this kind of old crone figure, and I'm handing over this child to my friend who's playing Britannia. So this is, so the next image is a Ravi Verma painting. It was not only a painting, but it was a very popular image which was circulating in various forms all over India. And what was interesting is that during the nationalist movement, the British would sort of clamp down and censor, any kind of activity, nationalist activity. So what they started doing was, in all the different forms like theater and art and so on, they started using images from the epics and from the religious stories, and so to get out of this whole censorship, and rape actually and abduction was seen as metaphors for colonization. So this is a famous incident from the Mahabharata, where the heroine Draupadi, they're in disguise, and they're actually staying in this, in the last year of the exile, they're staying in this kingdom, and the brother of the queen has his eye on her, and she is like a maid to the queen, and he is trying to make advances towards her. And finally, he is killed by Bhima. So this is a this particular story was used again and again in theater and in art, and it was circulating in the form of postcards, in the form of posters, and this also oil painting and so on, but in many popular forms. And this, the story is Kichaka Sairandri, the story of incident of Kichaka Sairandri. So many of these nationalist writers and dramatists also wrote plays, and they were very popular till again it would be censored in some way. So this is the image of Kali, and again it's a kind of calendar picture actually, and Kali was also one of the images, symbols of India at one point, till I think she was found maybe too violent, the figure. But here it's interesting because this Kali is, and look at the background of the original, it's like something from Michelangelo, or from the Last Judgment or something like that. And she is dancing on the figure of Shiva, which is actually there in the mythology, but the figure is white, which he could be covered with ash, but he could also be a symbol of the colonizer. So there I perform this, I'm the Kali figure, and an artist friend plays. So they're all hidden jokes as well, because my friends a lot of people can recognize the people playing the other roles, so it's also very funny. And so the very elaborate sort of, these are all very elaborate studio shots, which with painted backdrops, props, and so on. And I take a long time getting all these things together, so the production takes something like several months. I got the tongue from, it's a kind of a brass thing which I have to keep between my teeth, and and then collected the, that is from Kalighat in Calcutta. I asked a friend to send me that. And then the necklaces of heads is from Chandni Chowk. And so wherever I travel, I collect these things and I keep them, and at some point I use some things we make. And yeah, so the wig, I think, was, I found it in Mysore in some sort of costume shop. And yeah, so, and then of course you can see the elaborate sort of body makeup and so on. And it was very funny during the shoot because I was supposed to, it's a very active movement of the original Kali where she's putting her weight on the chest of Shiva. But whenever I tried to do that, I mean, this, my friend would shake, you know. So I couldn't balance, and finally we had to make it a less active movement, but anyway, it sort of works. So this is a very famous painting by Abanindranath Tagore, which was done in 1905. Actually, it was called Banga Mata. That is when the British split partitioned Bengal into Hindu and Muslim Bengal, basically. And it was the beginning of the Swadeshi movement as well. So, but it soon became a kind of a very nationalist image and a kind of icon of the Swadeshi movement, which is the self-rule movement and early days of early 20th century. And so this is a very different image. If you can see, it's a kind of like a, she's a Vaishnava saint with 4 arms, like an Indian goddess, but she holds these Swadeshi nationalist symbols, food, a sheaf of paddy, then you know, cloth. She holds a white cloth, and spirituality by the Rudrakshamala, and the education, which are supposed to be the 4 symbols for an ideal nation. It's actually a concocted sort of goddess which doesn't exist in Indian mythology, but it's a new goddess which has been invented. This is a very, very popular figure, and it is used by this party, as we all know, and as a Hindutva image, and it's the militant Durga figure, where this a man called Jesudas, which means the servant of Jesus, has actually painted the original painting. So he's a Christian guy, but it's become a kind of this particular image has become an icon, and you just see it everywhere. So instead of the national flag, she's holding the Om flag, which is a religious flag, and there's a tiger, there's a lion. And this lion thing is very interesting because I don't think the lion symbol was used in Indian mythology earlier, you know, because this lion is actually not native to India, but it's a kind of takeoff from Britannia, because Britannia is always shown with the lion. Of course, the lion doesn't exist in England as well, but it's taken from the colonies. So it's a kind of competition with the image of Britannia. So this is the last one. They're very, as I said, they're extremely elaborate sort of images, taking months to create. They're all huge. They're like 6 feet high and so on, 4 by 6 or something. So this is I was looking for a contemporary image, and the one on the right is a wonderful image by my friend Atul Dodia, the artist, very well-known artist. And he's done a series of these watercolors, huge watercolors of this character, this crone-like character, again coming back to this crone, you know, and doing these various things, you know, on the map. And so it's called a Woman with Chakki. Chakki is this grinding stone. And the grinding stone also is interesting because Atul, as like me, is a film buff. And I know he's taken the image from this famous film called Mother India, where it's supposed to be this, I mean, like the woman with a pot, and the woman, like, you know, grinding the grain, very typical pictures of rural India. You know, they're like archetypes of rural India. So that was very interesting. I wish you could, I hope you can see it properly, but yeah. So this is a long ongoing thing which I keep on doing, working in different forms. So in 2000, and I did performances. I did my first live performance with a poet friend, Mamta Sagar, who also happens to be my neighbor in Bangalore. And it was first performed in this artist space. So I had this image of, this artist space was very interesting in Bangalore because this artist friend had hired this space, hall for about a year, and or many of us, we gave in money, and in return we would get 2 weeks to do whatever we wanted over there. So then I said, or we could give it away to other artists. So I decided to just experiment, and I'm very nervous about live performance because I don't like being stared at, and I get stage fright and so on. But so it's very contained. This is the invitation. So it's very contained. I decided not to just go out like, into the public in a very unguarded way, and I created this elaborate set. I took these are from Delhi. Actually, they use them for the Ramlila. These sets are used for Ramlila performances. It's very popular kind of folk performances. So it's a completely it's a box set, and everything is very stylized. And including me, I'm playing Mother India, and then the only person who's contemporary is the poet. And what we decided was, I had this image of myself knitting, and I said I want to knit red wool, and I said all I will do is knit. And I said, can you respond with some poetry, like, nationalist poetry? So my friend had actually done her PhD on early women writers from Karnataka. So she said, oh, your image is very interesting and all that. And I said, let's explore this kind of history of women, and this, because women's rights and women's reform was very central to the nationalist movement. And in fact, there were, this women's widow remarriage, women's education and all that. There were many, many debates. And also my state had the first sort of legislative assembly where they were actually hotly debating it, also with women present. So we looked at this story of the early woman nationalist writer, Nanjangud Tirumalamba, who was a child widow and became, I think she ran 3 or 4 magazines, nationalist magazines, and she used to be a writer, a journalist, she used to write detective stories, she used to write poetry and so on. But what happened was, at a certain point, she was sort of insulted by one of the major male writers, while she was extremely famous, and she was also taught in schools in the syllabus at that before independence. And I think, as was said earlier, that her work was found very flat, that there was no psychological dimension. So she's attacked for that, and she was so humiliated that she disappeared, and everyone thought she was dead. So so then they discovered her during the women's movement, rediscovered her and celebrated her and all that. But basically it starts with talking about the image of Mother India, what she means, why she's this aristocratic figure and so on, and that why she's this ideal figure, the actual situation of, say, Nanjangud Tirumalamba, what happened to her. And she was the first to write nationalist verse and so on. And then later it ends with, I think, a quotation from Nehru saying that why do we have this aristocratic queenly figure for this, poor, to represent this poor country. And this was in the early years of independence. So I'll just quickly go through it. Mamta brings me in. I have these 2 false arms holding 2 flags. So I bless the people. And I sit down, and she actually gets me these, the wool, which is actually in a mess. So instead of knitting, I'm actually taking out the knots, which is also interesting. And then I can't knit without my specs. So we ceremonially, we incorporated it into the performance where she, puts on the specs onto my face. So then she walks around talking about this. It's a half-an-hour performance. So I don't say a thing, I don't even react to her, I'm just sitting there, whatever, untying these knots. So then she, I have no volition, so she takes me and leads me out. So this knitting thing was very interesting, so people had very interesting responses to it. My idea was like, that whole thing of the French Revolution and how these women used to sit in front and knit, and this red wool and all that. But other people said like, it's very domestic, and it's very warm. It's colonial because it's not from that area at all, from our region at all. It comes from, Europe. So there are different meanings to that whole thing as well, which was interesting. Then this is a kind of diorama I did, where I use mannequins, and they're dressed as various Mother India representations, one of them being the cow. And they have this, the spinning wheel and so on, different kinds of the globe, the spinning wheel, and so on. Something like a, a European portrait or something like that. And the things they used to have, but or it could even be a window display, like something like a commercial window display. So I've been doing this is another performance, my second performance. I've been doing it, I did it for the third time just now in January. Most of you know about Gauri Lankesh. Gauri Lankesh was a fearless journalist, an editor, who was kind of very strong in her views and a civil rights activist. And she was murdered in 2017. She happened to be a very close friend of mine and also lived in my neighborhood. So there was a lot written about her. In fact, I've written a long essay about her as well. But I wanted to do work of art to memorialize her and to celebrate her. And besides being an activist, she was also a normal person like all of us. And we lived in this, distant sort of suburb. But we used to have a lot of parties. And she was a good cook who gave me some recipes. So I decided to do a cooking performance where I memorialize her or celebrate her with one of her recipes. So her recipe is called Urgent Saru. It means like a quick curry. So this is one version of it. So this is again, I created a set. So this was during COVID time. So I've dressed as Mother India with those two fake arms, and I have a mask. And behind me is this assistant in a full PPE suit who's following me with a book in a hand and my specs. So I take the book. This was actually published in the book of artist recipes. So I write on the blackboard. I write the recipe on the blackboard. And whenever I'm making a movement, these flags shake. So it's actually quite funny. So I actually start cooking. It takes about half an hour. So and then there's these kind of sounds of cooking. Use the mixer grinder, grind things, and then the smell and so all that is a part of the. And at the end of it, it's like a ceremony where the food is handed out in small quantities to the audience. Here there was a very small audience because it was during the COVID, but it was broadcast on this thing. What is it called? Zoom. And so it's like a kind of like the Hindu ritual of the prasad, which is the holy food which is handed out. Or it could be the Christian Eucharist. And it's a red colored curry. It's like the red of blood, which is why I specifically chose that particular recipe. So this I read it again in Calcutta. I'll just quickly go through it, which is the capital of Bengal, the state, where, as I mentioned, Abanindranath Tagore, the famous artist or nationalist artist, he created this figure of Bharat Mata, Mother India. So I dress up as that form of Mother India, which I showed you a picture of as the kind of mendicant. I don't know why these images are so small, sorry. Anyway, so it was very interesting because it was in the government school classroom. So there was this, again I used the blackboard, and I like using these blackboards and slates as pedagogical sort of devices. So it becomes like a lesson. So, by the way, the classroom is called Amar Chitrakatha room. So, yeah, so then I start cooking, and yeah. So the people are sitting on the chairs, and then it's handed out. Yeah, so I've also been want to do a series of videos. I've done 2 or 3, but I want to do about 10 of them. It's called Good Habits. And there I've been using, I perform in front of the camera, doing sort of some actions. They're very short videos. I'll try and show you one if there's time. So I'm using these medical models working with these medical models, doing some actions. So this is called hygiene. So I've become very interested in eugenics. In fact, earlier I worked with anthropology and anthropometry, and I didn't realize then that anthropometry was very central to eugenics, which I didn't know much about. Then I sort of discovered this whole thing. I do quite a lot of research for my work, and people also help me by sending me material. And so now I'm sort of, this new project I'm working on is like really based on eugenics. Yeah, so that was one project. I showed you some of the works I did in about Mother India. And this other thing, set of work I'm going to show you is actually of sculptures. From 2015, I've been doing sculpture again, and basically objects. My early work, which I was known for, was were figurative works, and as he said, in terracotta. Now I've been working with a lot with copper. So again, I use all these, a lot of references. It's in create archives by using a lot of different references, sometimes historical references, and I'm also very interested in the 19th century, these kind of colonial disciplines. So what happened was I just wanted to do something. I felt a bit stuck and empty after working in a particular way for a long time with photography and video. So I decided to go to the local museums in Bangalore and just get refreshed. As soon as I walked into the archaeological museum in Bangalore, I found this wonderful vitrine with these fantastic objects which I'd never seen before. And they were actually copper plate manuscripts which were used as documents from many centuries. These I saw were from 15th, 16th century, but actually there are from even 2nd century AD, I think there are things. They were actually for important documents. While palm leaf was not so permanent, this was something which was permanent, and land deeds and trade deeds and things like that, which were usually buried under the ground. So there were wonderful things, colorings and markings on them, and they looked like ancient sort of archaeological manuscript things. So, sorry, this particular, this work is, so this work I'm going to show you is done in 2020, and it's called 1713 to 2006. And I was invited for a kind of what is called a international sculpture symposium in Baroda, which is a city in Gujarat where I studied. And usually I like to use local references when I go work somewhere. And I did some research, and Gujarat, the state is known as the kind of epicenter of communal riots. So I did got some material on it, and apparently from the early 18th century onwards, there have been these major communal riots in Gujarat. So I decided to make a fictional archive or a documentation of them. So, there are these things called, there are these ledgers in whole of North India actually called Bahikathas. So they are actually used as account books, and they're books made of paper but with a very nice sort of stitched cloth covers, which are elaborately stitched and usually in different colors, like mainly red, blue, or different colors. So I bought about 30 of them and got them cast in bronze. And so this is a vitrine which has piles of these bronze bahikathas which cannot be opened, they're closed. And they're sort of records of these riots. And so the mild riots had only, I'll say, one thin book or something like that. But the major ones would have a pile of books, and below each pile was a date. So they're in very beautiful colors and all that, which I patinated. I worked on them with acids. And nothing else is said. The title just says these dates, but I think once you read some of the dates, you know exactly what it is. So these are actually exact copies of these recreations of these books, which are beautifully sort of sewn. So this, this other one I was talking to about, like finding this material in the archaeological museum. So what happened is, after I worked in Baroda, I got very interested in, I'm very interested in documents, and this also refers to some work I was doing before I started photographic work, where I made some books and so on. So I decided to work with this whole idea of the document, and when I found these, these copper plates, Tamra Shasanas in the museum, I said, this is something I can easily do in the studio rather than going to a caster and so on. So when I started off, I wasn't sure what it was going to be about. I thought it could be something about land, because there are a lot of land disputes around land, in India in different ways. But then as I started sort of working on them, they all have these different scripts, and it all became about scripts. So there were all these beautiful old ancient scripts in India, and India, I think, has the most number of languages, and also the scripts, the hundreds of scripts. So I started, researching these scripts, and actually it's gibberish, because I copied these scripts, but they're all mixed up. In fact, somebody said it's like a very Dada work, it's like the Dada nonsense poetry, because they're mysterious objects, look very ancient, but they're actually fake archaeological, objects. And I made 100 of them over 3 years. So each one is an individual object. Each one is different, but altogether they make this kind of huge and mysterious sort of archive. And whenever I've exhibited them, I didn't know how people would, it's quite abstract and conceptual work, I didn't know how people would react. But everybody, including young kids who came there, reacted to it. It was very interesting, because it reminded them of something or the other. And somebody said, oh, it looks like these wooden slates we used to use when we were in, when we were kids. They were in these similar shapes, and we used to write on them with ink, and so on. So they're actually, and another interesting response I got was about this fake history, how fake histories are being, and fake archaeology is being created now. So there were different kinds of meanings coming out of it, which was very interesting, because you start off doing something and then it becomes some other thing. And I think that other thing happens also because of the volume, because if you have only 1 or 10 or 20, it doesn't make so much sense. If you have a mass of things, I think it also starts resonating in a different way. So I'm just showing you some details. So this is how So I actually took these forms from the, the stuff that I found on the internet, but I did my own thing to them. So some of them are elaborate, some of them are broken. So they're all, again, this thing of the copy and the reproduction and the fake. I'm always playing with this whole thing of the original and the fake and the authentic and the inauthentic and the copy and the original. And there's a confusion also going on between these ideas. So basically these copper sheets are cut in these shapes, then they're coated with a kind of ground. I etch on them, I write on them, and then it's etched in acid, and it's cleaned and treated with different acids to get the colors. So to make them look old, and also for the beauty of it. So another set of works I did over 2 years was called Nara. Nara means slogans. And some about 2-3 years ago, there were a whole lot of protests, the anti-CA, NRC protests, which many of us were going to. And I said, as an artist, how can I memorialize this thing, because most of the material, they were all posters, and there's a lot of poetry. people were writing fantastic poetry, and it was traveling all around, immediately all over India. People were translating, singing them in the protests, and so on. And so I wanted to make something permanent. So again, I choose, as I said, I like the idea of the blackboard and the slate. I've used them several times in my work in different ways. So these are a set of, this is actually made of copper, but I've framed them like school, old-fashioned school slates. And there are like 50 of them. Again, they're drawn and written and etched. So this is how they look together. It's big, actually, big tables. So these are the, I'll just show you some of them. These are the slogans. So I was designing each one quite elaborately and going back to different kinds of materials like, Soviet posters and, all kinds of popular materials, sometimes taking from the original CA posters themselves. And pedagogical materials. So this is Dabolkar, Pansare, Kalburgi, Akhlaq, Rohit, Gauri. Our martyrs live in our struggles. So this is that famous, what's his name's thing, Everything Will Be Remembered. Famous poems. And again, using this whole thing of the school notebook, the lined notebook. We will resist, no CA, NRC, CAB. So it's in 3 languages. It's in Kannada, Hindi, and English. So strangely, a lot of the slogans were actually in English because I think they wanted the entire press to, it to be recognized. So it's again a very famous poem in Hindi. Kala Kanun Wapas Lo. Again, using these typical kind of, sometimes these Soviet kind of poster images, designs. It's about this Dalit medical student who committed suicide and about her. So everything is done by me in my handwriting, and I've designed it with it was a lot of fun because I was using these rulers and compasses like we used to when I first entered art school in the foundation course. We used to do this, design. In fact, people ask me whether I've designed it on the computer, and I said no, I drew actually on the material. Pinjra Tod, break the cage, kind of feminist slogan. Hum dekhenge, we will see again a famous line from a poem. Hum kagaz nahi dikhayenge, we will not show our papers. Justice for Asifa, gang raped and murdered in a temple. I don't know if you can read. Write down, I am a Mia. My serial number in the NRC is 200545. I have 2 children. Another is coming next summer. Will you hate him as you hate me? This is a poet from this is this famous line from Rohit Vemula, a Dalit low-caste student who was forced to commit suicide, let's say. The value of a man was reduced to his immediate identity and nearest possibility, to a vote, to a number, to a thing. Never was a man treated as a mind. The huge farmers' protests. Okay, some of them. And I'm ending soon. This is a set of works I did called blackboards. So when I was doing these small size plates, I wanted to sort of expand. And again, I take a lot of images from the daily life and things around me. And they're large, like some of them are 4 by 6 and some of them are 2 by 3 feet. Again, elaborately etched on copper plates and colored with acids. So the 6 works titled Hospital, Disaster Plan, Stock Board, Weekly Schedule, Ration and Don't Touch form a series called Blackboards. The artist has been frequently using the image of the school blackboard and the school slate through the years in her work as symbols of pedagogy. These blackboards, which now take off as independent statements, are handmade copies of the humble signboards that surround us and are put up in our institutions to guide and inform us, where the modern rationality of tables and lists frame the frightening irrationality that rules people's lives. By using an expensive classical material like copper and a traditional technique like acid etching, the banal material is made valuable by preserving them as museum objects, as signposts of our age. So all these images are actually directly copied from the internet. I looked around for these images and downloaded them. Very complicated to make because of the weight and the huge size of them. So this is a ration card for food to be given to people who have, too poor to buy food under this government program. So there are all these rules and regulations. They're all about rules and regulations and lists and. So this is crazy. Disaster plan, and there's no disaster plan. This is all done during COVID, by the way. Those 2 years of COVID. So again, ration, they have these boards outside the ration shops. And BPL is like this lowest category, poverty level. Something poverty level.
Below.
What? Below poverty level, correct. So again, these kind of meaningless sort of lists and tables and so on. Okay, is there time to show a 2-minute video? Yeah. You'll have to close the lights here because it's really a problem. It's a lot of black. It's just 2 minutes, but it's like one of the, Can you turn off the lights? What happened? What happened? No, turn off the lights first, please. I'll turn it on. Turn off the lights. Thanks. Okay, this is actually from the Mother India project. So the actually series of videos are about how the eugenics affects government programs.
Thank you, Pushpamala. I'm not going to really ask you a question, but just to make an observation and then ask if there are any questions. And I'm sure we're running quite over time. But I thought it was uncanny the way many of the works you've created and the way you were talking also seemed to relate much to what Professor Carlos was talking about in terms of this constant need to write and to read simultaneously and to document, whether you're documenting fiction or whether you're documenting perceived realities, and then the sense of historical time, what that means, you grappling with that, with the reproductions of the khatas and the Tamil Shasanas, and delving into ancient history, bringing it all into the present time, and just this mania that many of us feel that no matter how absurd life is, that we need to process it through archiving, documenting. This was visual representation rather than literary representation. Even the fact that you took letters, and even just without meaning, those letters also were part of that mania to just to document and process what's around us. So that's what I got from it, and thank you so much.
To document those scripts because they're unknown.
Yes.
You know, they're all like vanished scripts and earlier, forms of the present day scripts, but from centuries ago, and this whole vast sort of store of them, and the variety of them, and also these, like people were moving around back and forth and trading with the rest of the world, and there are all these traces of them in those scripts, because as soon as when I was sort of researching them, it's like you get carried away and go into these histories, and then because there's all this Wikipedia things about the script and the history, and it's under this kind of empire, and then they were trading here, and then then suddenly you'll find some sort of Arabic scripts within another script, and then you'll find that some weird place like Maldives was the center of sort of world trade or something, it was one of the stops. So, and all these kinds of things, and then there's a story of apparently one of these Chinese kings, emperors, there's this vast empire. I can't remember who he was, but he wanted to have a single script for the whole empire, So that empire stretched, maybe it was the Mongols or something, because the empire, from West Asia to something, to Korea or something like that. It's an enormous empire. So he asked this Tibetan monk to create a script. So he created this script called Fagspa. So it's this exotic thing one had never heard of. And this Fagspa is very funny because it actually reads from top to bottom like a Chinese script. But those letters look like some Devanagari, it looked like Indian scripts, But of course, it was such a crazy scheme that it never took off. So apparently they found 2 or 3 manuscripts of that Fagspa script, which this same monk must have written because no one else could have found it useful to learn it maybe, And so it's so contemporary, because that's what people are trying to do now. They're trying to impose a single language, a single script on everything, or there's this whole thing of standardization, and so it's very interesting. It's about the past, but actually it's about, though I take a lot of things historically, like for example, I got interested in epigraphy, when I was doing this. So this whole thing of, so it's something very contemporary as well, because it tells you about your, what's happening. It sort of explains, or it sort of contextualizes, or what's happening in the present. And again, when I discovered this whole thing of eugenics, which I'd heard the name, but I didn't know what it was about. I suddenly, actually, when I was passing through New York, I came across, somebody told me that in NYU there's a show and you must see it. So a friend of mine. So I went there, and so they had recreated this notorious thing called the Eugenics Record Office, which actually closed down, I think, in the 60s or 70s. But eugenics was this invented by this Dalton, who was a cousin of, Darwin. And it was sort of based on this theory of evolution and all that, but about this kind of a pseudoscience of good genes. So all the the progressive people of the day were very impressed by this. Like the early suffragettes, or even George Bernard Shaw, like our national leaders. It was also popular here, and so it was also used as a kind of for of course population control, and all these things come out of that, and a lot of it was also racist, and also, it was to purify the genes, basically. So then I started thinking, I said, what's happening now? So I think cleansing and these ideas have been there. So the ERO, the Eugenics Record Office, became so notorious, especially during the civil rights movement. I think there was a lot of sort of protest about that, and so it closed down probably late 60s or 1970 or something like that. So it is a very interesting thing, and so it's a kind of continuation of my investigations because I've used anthropometry earlier, Native women of South India, which I discovered. I didn't know anything about it. So ethnography, anthropometry, and I've been very interested. So I've been sort of taking from these colonial disciplines in a way, and then seeing how these kind of constructs continue till today. My work is called post-colonial, which really irritates me because actually I'm talking about the present. I mean, I couldn't be bothered. It's 70 years since we've got independence, and so why should we blame somebody, else for these, what the mess that we're in today,
But yet that bridge to the 19th century is very important because of all these various disciplines that came up out in the 19th century.
Yes, which are influencing us today.
Even today,
marking us today, And that is the problem, that why are we still using all these things, from police laws to sedition laws to everything is why should we use them? We can question them, so yeah.
Great. Would anyone like to ask questions? Please.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with these two projects it's not so prominent, but in my
these weren't so
usual
funny.
work, it's a lot of things are very funny and sardonic, and even these, if you actually see them being performed or see them, it's actually even the performances and all that. It's first of all the artist doing something weird, and then the friends who are involved in it. But some other works, it's much more direct, very comic. So I go, even the kind of actions when I have these false arms and I'm doing something and it's shaking and putting on wearing this mythological costume and putting on specs and, spectacles and doing something. So it's I want to be entertaining, because even this, for example, I want to do a set of 9 films, but I've been able to do only 3 from 2016 because I know I have all the ideas, I've even bought these crazy medical models and all that, which are quite expensive and they're lying there. But I don't know how to make this 1 or 2 minute thing, which actually is very clear in what it says, but also very entertaining and, so it's very difficult to compress something and, make it.
About the parts of the brain that you take out and then wash them and put them back. Somehow it's got something to do with brainwashing or what's going on.
I think it's very obvious. I hate explaining. That's what I mean. Everybody gets it. Also it's Swachh hygiene. So
I think apparently as empirical time closes in upon us, I've got an indication that only one more question is to be allowed, and I think the gentleman at the back is the one who raised his hand first.
Yeah. Am I audible? Yeah. I was interested in this project on Gauri Lankesh that you did, and at one point in the presentation you said that besides being an activist, she was also a normal person. And one of the ways in which the visual archive concerning this event of the killing of Gauri Lankesh is that it is, it becomes an event which feels like a spectacle, and the way you respond to it is through this invocation of something which is literally quotidian, this idea of cooking. And I was thinking how does that relate in some ways to the idea of the bust that is the theme of the symposium, and I was thinking if you could talk about how does that...
No, I think as I briefly talked about it, but this whole idea of the bust is against the kind of celebratory, successful or the grandiloquent or something like that. So I think something like cooking is very normal and daily, and it's also as a kind of art form, or the idea of the domestic and cooking and domestic work and all that was very much, it's the long history of being taken up by the feminist movement, as something that's to be talked about and brought into kind of art. They're subaltern materials actually. So I'm very interested in the recipe book, and the recipe book is also very interesting because it was again part of this women's reform thing, in nationalist times, And also it's a form of modernity, because in a traditional society you don't have a recipe book. You learn from the tradition and maybe you do some improvisations and so on. But I've also made a film on material I got from my mother's and mother-in-law's recipe books. So it's a 10-minute film called Rashtriya Kheer and Desi Salad. Again, it's the Independence Day recipe, you know, the title. But actually I talk about the ideal Indian family. It's actually the recipe, the books are my mother-in-law's book was very interesting because, particularly interesting because it was actually the army notes of my father-in-law, in which my mother-in-law had written in the margins, you know, these recipes and the notes and all that. And then later on, it goes on like for 10 years, these set of 4 books. And later on the son, who actually was my ex-husband, he also writes on it as a kid, school kid, you know, he's also drawing and writing in it. So I took that material, made it into a script, and then I had this family in which I'm the mother. And again, like it's about this whole idea, like, you know, Susie Taru had written an essay about the ideal family, ideal nuclear family as a metaphor for the nation. It was about this Gujarati writer called Saroj Pathak and her autobiography. So this essay was about that. So I was sort of inspired by that. I took it as a structuring sort of element, you know. And so this is the second work I've done on recipes. See, what happened when Gauri died is we knew her so well. We were part of this group of people. We used to meet all the time. And the things that were written about her was as if she's some kind of dried sort of person, like, you know, who's constantly just being an activist and all that. It's not that, you know. She was just like a normal person like us. Like, you know, she used to wear red lipstick all the time. We used to tease her. And then she was particular. She was quite fashionable. In the earlier days, later on, she became kind of quite ascetic. And then we used to, because both of us, no one would visit us, like, because we lived so far away, so we'd throw these parties. And then she was a good cook, and she gave me several recipes. And even in the recipes, I chose this particular one because it's a kind of, it's curry which is red in color. It's a coconut curry, a tomato coconut curry, actually. Because it was like this kind of, the blood, you know, the Eucharist, idea of the Eucharist and all that. So it's also like this, I mean, I don't know exactly what Amit means by bust and all that and this thing, but this is my interpretation of taking some daily thing, you know, and making it, and there again, if I just come in normal costume, I thought about it, as I am or something and cooked, it would not be so interesting as this kind of weird character coming in, like, you know, this Mother India character coming in and cooking. Because then it changes, because what happened was that she was called a traitor. And, you know, that anti-national and so on. There was this violent sort of campaign against that when she was, you know, that's why she was assassinated as well. So I wanted to counter this, and people have critiqued it. They've said that why are you dressing up as this kind of Hindutva image, you know, and talking about Gauri? And I said, no, I'm just actually using that image in many ways, as I showed you, you know, that's why I wanted to show more or less the whole project. There are other works also in the project, but so that to see that I'm just breaking and interrogating and doing different kinds of crazy things, and that's where the playfulness, I mean, humor and playfulness also comes in, you know. So I don't want, you know, what's happened to this particular image of the whatever, common kind of accepted image is that everybody is using it. When I go to my costume guy, like, you know, I'll find some school kids over there before Independence Day, they'll be hiring this Mother India costume and all that, which is like a Bharatanatyam costume actually. Basically,
like a uniform.
So with a crown and all that, and it could be from it could be Muslim, Christian, whatever, Hindu kids doing that. Like it's just immediately you recognize it. And because I went to this thing Calcutta, I decided to change that image and do a kind of local image of which was actually very interesting for me as well. So there again, this because it's a different image of Mother India, more peaceful image, and yeah, so I'm trying to do different things. I don't know if it works. I'm also criticized for it, and so I think about it. But sometimes you just have to put it out, you know, if you get something, and if you overthink, then nothing happens, and so you keep sort of. So I want to keep doing this, and you know, I may do another version with another character, you know, and also it's very interesting because I was also taking from the reference of these very popular cooking programs on TV. So everyone's hooked onto it in India, like, you know, of course. That Australian thing, like, you know, whatever, Master Chef, and then all the Indian forms, like, you know, in every language, it's very, very popular. So basically everybody is watching these programs, and it's also a kind of reference to that. But what happens is I didn't know what would happen, because I first did it, I was invited to do it for the Hyderabad Literary Fest. And that I didn't know exactly what to do. I didn't show that, but there was something like 100 people watching me for 45 minutes, including small kids. And I said, this is so funny, because nobody watches anybody cook. It's boring, okay, even if you're learning, you might wander off and come back. But because I was in costume, and then people are standing still and watching this whole process, because even when you watch the TV, they don't show you the whole process. All the entire boiling time, they don't show you. This thing was actually being cooked in front of everybody. So they always edit. So it's very interesting. And then then you start noticing, people start noticing the sounds, the smells, and so on. And then this character, this mythological character, and then using this mixie, gas stove, very common things in any Indian kitchen, chopping something, and then the smells of this tadka, and the sounds of the tadka, and the smell of the frying oil and the cooking food. And then people were lining up at the end of it. We gave them a bit of rice and this curry and all that, and happily they were sort of eating it, So it's very interesting. You don't know what's going to happen, It takes different twists and turns because of the form. If I had done a video of it, it'd be very different. Because it was live, then again it becomes complex in a certain way.
Thank you, Pushpamala, for taking us through your archives of the present, and thank you, Professor McCarthy. And it's a coincidence that as Pushpamala was speaking, our food was being cooked. So although we didn't get to see it, we'll just head out. We'll break for about 25 minutes and have our lunch and be back for the next session. Thank you.
And at least we know what Mother India is doing in her spare time when she's not posing for posters.